Hello, everybody, and we welcome you to our Sunday morning roundtable discussion on Sunday, October 11th, 2020. We are recording from the Plainfield Christian Science Church Independent, Plainfield, New Jersey, the United States of America. And we're so glad you could join us this beautiful autumn day. And we will begin with our morning prayer.
From page 62 of the Blue Book, Mrs. Eddy gave some prayers to her students. Study the Bible daily, and dear one, pray. Ask the divine love every day to give you all that the Lord's Prayer inculcates. Go alone by yourself 1/2 hour every morning and ask God good, thy kingdom come. Ask to establish the reign of honesty, peace, and purity in your consciousness, and to overthrow and cast out all that is unlike the Christ love. Ask to forgive those that wrong you even as God forgives you, and see how this must be for you to reflect God. Ask for deliverance from temptation. Ask for patience, meekness, peace, and so may the peace of grace of God be with you. May the divine light of Christian Science, which lighteth every enlightened thought, illumine my faith and understanding, exclude all darkness and doubt, signal the perfect faith wherein to walk, the perfect principle whereby to demonstrate the perfect man and perfect law of God. Mary Baker Eddy.
Beautiful. Wise counsel. Thank you. All right, we'll go to the watching point, Linda.
Watch number 229. Watch lest you believe that your work is to make nothing of error, rather than to realize its nothingness. And so you regard your work as a man might who is told to move a mountain of sand merely with a shovel and wheelbarrow. Our work is not to make error nothing. It is to cast out the belief in its reality which we have accepted. Once Mrs. Eddy expressed this point as follows in connection with Isaiah 43:2. Quote, "Our work is not to change God's work, for that is finished and perfect. Neither is it to make error nothing, for it is that already. But to stand, apparently in the midst of it, unmoved, knowing its nothingness." Unquote.
Thank you. Okay, comments.
The most difficult thing for me has been sometimes to stand in the midst of something and still know that it's nothing, even though it looks like something or feels something. And that's what I've been learning how to do better. I like how Daniel Jensen puts it in his one of his articles. He said, even when you're knee-deep in it, know that it's an illusion. It's nothing. And I use that a lot. So just to be unimpressed, because no matter how it looks or feels, it's still nothing.
Thank you.
And how is it that we know for certain that it's nothing?
Because God is all. He's everything.
Exactly. You start with the allness of God good. If it's not of God, it can't be anything.
Yeah.
And as it says, when we are sure of the finished perfection that nothing can change, then we know that even though it looks all horrible, it's still nothing. And she does tell us about chemicalization, where she says that what I term chemicalization is the upheaval produced when immortal truth is destroying erroneous mortal belief. Mental chemicalization brings sin and sickness to the surface, forcing impurities to pass away, as is the case with the fermenting fluid. So in fact, good is going on when sometimes it feels like everything is increased and troubling.
Thank you.
And it seems like what we're going through now, the whole world seems to be all uncertainty and everything else. But it's all false beliefs being vanquished, really. So, which you stand still not afraid.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it's false beliefs being brought to the surface so they can be seen for what they are. And for us, the key is to have clear enough vision to see what is what, to see right is right and wrong is wrong. And it's our vision that matters.
Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. And on one side there will be science and peace, the other side discord and dismay. And this is what Florence brought out is very important, because many times in healing, sometimes patients will say they're getting worse. Well, the error is being brought out, and that's the time to stand all the more and to conquer it. And again, you're not facing some terrible something. You're just facing a belief that there is such a thing as a power apart from God. Might seem like a big something, but you'll prove it is not. Jeremy, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that this distinction has helped me with the watches, and like you just said about on one side there'd be science, on the other side discord and dismay. It seems like the two sides of this thing. If you think the error is something huge, you're going to be like, oh no, there's all this discord and dismay. How do I undo this? So much better to attack it from the other side.
And the other, always be very careful you don't go around saying, oh, it's nothing to people. Even your children, their books written where my mother, I'm suffering, and it's nothing. You can be so cold and unloving. Know it and prove it, and then maybe you can talk about it. But don't say it when someone is in the middle of a difficulty. Oh, it's nothing. And watch it in your testimonies too. Oh, it was nothing. Because we do have new people listening. I often think of our organist, Jared. And what would he think? You say you have a problem, and then, oh, but it was nothing. Well, what are we talking about? How can you be healed of nothing? I mean, it just totally...
It's unreal. It's otherworldly.
Yeah, it's otherworldly.
It doesn't meet people where they need to be met.
Yes. So...
That's essentially what turned me off from science when I was 16, and I wanted nothing to do with it at all.
we sound like a lot of wackos. We do. So always watch it, because we get into that jargon, and we're not just talking to a bunch of people where we, winking at each other. Well, we know what you mean. No, we're talking to a broad audience that needs to be fed and needs the truth, and we're very careful. We did have a problem. It wasn't just nothing at the time. It seemed to be something. So
I think we can reassure with the love of God, the presence of the love of God, which will never leave you, and that comforts during such times. Instead of saying it's nothing, I mean, we can say that, yes, God is still here loving us and will see us through, or something like that, instead of brushing away somebody's terrifying time. I know I was in that sometimes.
Yes.
Back then, and it's not easy.
Yeah, because Florence was a nurse, and she had to pitiful patients with their fears. This is that whole part in Science and Health. And she talks about the cruelty of, oh, nothing ails you. It's not science. It's Christian science is love. And the first part, it says Christian
Love is the heart and soul of Christian Science, and without it, the letter is but a dead rite.
Yeah.
It would cast a stone upon the heart.
So,
but I want to go back to a point that we just talked about. You know, there's this saying, it's always darkest just before the dawn. And that describes how error is cast out of our experience. When we are facing an issue and we are declaring the allness of God and the nothingness of this illusion, that's whether it calls itself sickness, whether it calls itself lack, whether it calls itself whatever, a cornered wild animal is at its most ferocious when it's cornered, when it's ready to be destroyed. And I use an animal, a wild animal as an example here, but an error is at its worst. It appears to be at its worst when it's cornered and about to be destroyed. That's when you need to be even the strongest in your declarations and the most courageous in your going forward, because that is the point where a lot of people give up. You know, when it's cornered and it comes at you and it just throws everything it has at you to try to discourage you from finishing its destruction.
and it's why Mrs. Evans always instructed us when we called a practitioner to always tell the practitioner first about the progress that you made that week. Because you're wrestling with, what does she say? It's a strong man. You're wrestling with mortal mind. And I looked up the definition of aggressive mental suggestion. Aggressive is ready to attack, the first to attack, and then make a strong attempt to win. All right? It's she calls it aggressive for a reason. So if you just lie back in your bed and think about how miserable you are, you're not rising up. You've got to rise up. That's 390 to 393. You've got to be willing to tackle it. And that means, yes, what progress have you made during the week? Because it's telling you didn't make any progress. You're worse than ever. And all this stuff, as it's darkest before the dawn sometimes. So this is a discipline. And I can remember with being asked that and thinking, well, this is crazy. I'm not making progress. I don't have anything to say. Well, that is the devil. And this is what has to be. This is handling the animal magnetism. That's what it's saying to you. So you've got to get on the offensive and say, that's a darn lie. I have made progress. And then write it down and think about it and be grateful for it. Because you have. Mrs. Eddy says if you're working at all, you're making progress. It just wants you to think that you are not. And it's then, if it can get you to just lie back and tell you you're cooked, well, great. No. Rise in rebellion against it. It seems to be aggressive. You are more aggressive. That's why the article, Death Overcome, is such an important one by Bicknell Young. Because the louder the error got, the louder, we believe it was Bicknell Young got in speaking to it. You can't be passive or submissive. Not when you're dealing with what appears to be aggressive mental suggestion. You can't. I've tried it. Believe me, it does not work. If it worked, they do it, but it doesn't.
And this is why Mrs. Eddy says gratitude and joy
yeah.
are the two essential ingredients in healing. If you fill your thought with gratitude for something, anything, that opens the door for you to receive the clearer vision, to see this illusion as nothing. If you don't give gratitude for something, if your thought is negative, you've closed the door. and you've lost the battle before you've even begun.
And it shows you're focused on what is wrong, because there's so much right going on. My Russian daughter-in-law, maybe I mentioned this to you, but anyway, she'd read Eustace's article, Gratitude. Now, she came from an atheist country. Christian Science is very all new to her. But after reading that article on gratitude by Eustace, she said she thought she should frame it. And then she wrote an article, and we're going to have it in the Liberator. It's a little bit secular, but she makes some super good points. And one is, you have this whole clump of things you should be grateful for, and it's just this clump, somewhere. You don't even think about it. And but then something wrong. Oh man, you think about that, boy. You give it all the attention in the world, that it wants. And this is the fight to get back to no. Let's think about all this good. Many people who are sick, well, they still have something. They can read, they can hear, they can, think about what you can do.
If you have a pulse.
Yeah, there's a quote from Paul Newman. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. So let's focus on that.
So let's be grateful to be alive.
Yes, and she brings that out too. She says we have life with capital L-I-F-E. The fact you're alive, are you grateful for that? Some people aren't grateful for even that. So this is what it's all about. And Era does want to claim you and cook you. But remember again, as the watching point says, is nothing real. You've given it all this life, and now you're having to deal with it. So you get rid of it in your own thought. And you can. God has made man capable of this. And nothing can vitiate
the ability and power divinely bestowed upon man.
Thank you. Upon you. So exercise those muscles. Mr. White, I guess his name was. It was Mrs. Evans' father. She told me he used to keep this little leather notebook of wonderful notes about Christian Science. And she had it. And she would take from it and write articles. And one of the articles, and this is one of the early healing thoughts, and it always helped me so much. He said, even about focusing on the enduring the good and the true, keeping your focus on God rather than on the problem. He said, even if you're in a house that's burning down, you do it then, no matter, like Karen just said, even if you're knee deep in the problem. Yes. And if you've let something go on and on for a while, yes, it might take you a while to switch and reverse, get out of the muck, but that doesn't mean you give up. And then you will prove what this subject is about, that sin, disease, and death are not real. They are not real, and we will prove it. We can prove it, and all of you are proving it. Now, before we get into that, Jeremy was telling me something rather interesting that he will share.
Oh, okay. There is this thing called deepfakes, where you can take video of somebody talking and then superimpose somebody else's face upon it. And they do this by, they use graphics cards, which are stronger than a normal processor, to do this. And so I just thought it was an important thing to be aware of and work on, that we are not fooled by any of these images, because recently the company that makes these graphics cards just released a new version, and in 0.5 seconds the whole supply was purchased. And I mean, that's enough to set up a render farm so that you can do with minimal delay, in real time, this kind of stuff. So I think it's very important to know that this stuff is out there. They can even do this with voices as well. It's not just, they can subvert the whole package. So it's
like a 007 movie And again, this is where our spiritual sense is so important. We're going to get into about the snare of the fowler in a little bit that Susan wrote about, because this is one of the snares of the fowler, the deception. Only your spiritual sense can tell you what's true and is not true, and all the things that the devil would try to do, so-called devil, because we know the devil is not real, but and you have to have your spiritual sense. That's why you get away from personality, even slander. I mean, in this article by Spurgeon, snare of the fowler, if it can't get you one way, then it will slander a perfectly good person, and keep the lie going, keep the lie going, keep the lie going until you believe it to be true. So one thing you can always check are facts about what has the person done or not done factually, or that's helpful. But in this article that Susan mentions on the forum, yeah, the snare of the fowler, and Spurgeon is saying, well, let the attacks come. Eventually, the worth of whatever person will become evident. Well, it's true. I've experienced it. Probably others of you have too. Keep knowing the truth, and that truth will make you free. A lie cannot stand, no matter how vicious it is, no matter how real it seems, even if they've imposed your voice and face and makes it look like you're saying or doing something you're not. So the wiles of the devil, we'll be very alert to them.
That's why I love.
Go ahead, Florence.
No, go ahead, Florence.
Sure. I just love the word supreme, because I keep my thought that God is supreme. Then it does show that, no matter how crafty the methods are, it cannot withstand the power of God, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, and omni-action of Spirit God. I just love to keep that thought.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's impossible. And what we see is that error, people, the craftiness, the devices of the crafty, it goes back on them. It will destroy them. They will be destroyed. They will be taken in their wicked plots. Well, the arrow will be destroyed, and if they hang on to the arrow, they'll
go with it.
They'll go with it till they wake up.
And didn't we see that in spades with Mrs. Eddy? I mean, she was constantly under attack.
Yeah.
But she rose above it. She saw it for what it was, and she never personalized it. And that is why she survived and accomplished so much what she did.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that there is a wonderful article on the website, The Illusion of Animal Magnetism by Daniel Jensen, which speaks to what we're all talking about this morning, the illusion of it all, and how you stick to a fact, and the fact destroys the error.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of my very favorite articles. I love that article by him. Thank you. Makes it very clear, because, I mean, even we're hearing what Jeremy just told us, but the hypnotists, the illusionists, haven't they been doing this anyway? I mean, that's how they do it. They just deceive you into seeing something that's not even true. And thank God that we have Mrs. Eddy, because this is her training. This is what she's taught us. Question, don't believe the illusion. It's not of God, then it is some kind of an illusion. So thank you very much. Wonderful article. If you're not familiar with it, become familiar. So, Lil, you want to read the golden text, please?
Bless the Lord, O my soul, who forgiveth all thine iniquities, who healeth all thy diseases, who redeemeth thy life from destruction.
Thank you. That's all that we're talking about. Bless him. And then, as Joe points out in her forum about, again, we start with joy. Therefore, with joy shall ye draw water out of the wells of salvation. You keep your joy always. It's a major point in science. No matter how loud error might be screaming at you, you sing a hymn. What was that children's story about Cheerio, the little bird?
She was telling in the car this morning.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, Nancy, tell us about it.
Well, it was about this beautiful little cardinal named Cheerio who lived with a family, a little girl, little boy, and they would always leave in the afternoons, they would open the cage door to let the little bird out to sing and fly around the house. And one day, when they let the bird out, it happened to land in a drawer. It caught the attention of it saw a little string in the drawer, thought it was a good idea for its nest. And the mom went by and unknowingly shut the bird in the drawer. And so the family was searching for this bird, but when they were quiet, all of a sudden they could hear this beautiful little singing bird somewhere, and they followed the singing and wound up opening the drawer, and out flew that little bird as happy as could be. He was so joyful at finding that string and expressing his joy instead of being fearful trapped in the dark. And it was a lesson to the little boy and girl of how God is with you, and then when you're singing and expressing your joy, you aren't alone, and whatever you need, your need is met.
Thank you. That's a beautiful story. I remember it as a child reading that story. That one and another one about, if you're a squirrel, you can't be a rabbit, or the idea you had to be what God made you to be. You can't be something other than what God made you. And we're all different, and we all are beautiful, and we all have a place to fulfill. And anything that tells you otherwise, again, is aggressive mental suggestion that you kick out. So we all have our place. No one better than the other. Thank you. It's a beautiful story. So the point is, if you find yourself in a dark drawer and you feel like you can't get out and the walls are coming in on you, what do? Sing. Sing. God will find you. God knows where you are anyway, and you will find your release. All righty, so we have the beautiful 91st Psalm, and Craiglet is here today. Craiglet, you wrote about it on the forum. You want to speak to it?
Well, exactly what I wrote. I realized that just like Elijah, David must have had this great sense about God was only in the good, and if you loved God and held to His love, you should never let that blind you from anything. Not, as Elijah was saying, not the earthquake or the fire, but to stand, just knowing His love and waiting for His salvation. That's like the shadow of the Almighty. That's what I felt. I saw the relationship between these great Bible speakers.
Thank you. And Susan and also Florence. Susan's here, right? Yes. Want to speak to it?
Yeah. Hi. I was looking up the snare of the fowler because I wasn't sure where that came from. And as you just said, Spurgeon wrote a really good sermon on that subject. And it reminded me of how Mrs. Eddy talks about animal magnetism. And I felt it was the same thing. But one thing he says is that the snare of the fowler is generally noted for its adaptation. You do not find a fowler setting the same snare for one bird as for another. He knows his bird and he adapts his bait to it. He would be an unwise fowler who should go to work with the same machinery to catch the lark that flies on high as the duck that swims along the stream. So Spurgeon was saying that the so-called devil, which we know isn't really real, does try to adapt to the weakness of whatever each person seems to have.
Thank you very much.
And then I went on to talk about how the challenge I have had is trying to sit down to do a watch. At first I was dealing with being really distracted and I couldn't even think clearly. But I realized that that is animal magnetism. It doesn't want me to do good and to work with God. So now I'm more alert to that.
Good.
Thank you. And believe me, you're not the first person who's had this. I don't know of anyone who hasn't had it. As you mentioned, someone texts you, phone rings, this happens, that happens, you feel drowsy, been wide awake all evening, suddenly you feel like you're ready for a nap. So,
yeah, I even found myself doing housework and I was like, what am I doing?
Yeah, well, this is what animal magnetism would try to do, to make you forget or neglect your duty to God, to your leader, and to mankind. And it's aggressive, it can be, and you have to rise above it, not let it happen. And it's a good point, the era adapting itself, because we were always told, era comes to you tailor-made, just in the way that it will seem real and logical, so you'll buy it. It's not going to say, here I am, watch out for me. It comes very...
It tries to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Evans used to say, we should know, each one of us, what our Achilles heel is. Mm-hmm. In other words, we should know if we have any cherished, anything that we cherish more than God, the devil will find it, and it will get to us through that cherishing. So if we are cherishing another person, a family member, a job,
a pet.
Exactly.
A pet.
Right. If we cherish something more than God, it's going to use that something to keep us from doing our duty to God. Which is why Jesus, one of Jesus' sermons, if you love father or mother or brother or sister more than me, you have no part in me. So we should all know what our Achilles heels are.
There was a past roundtable where you talked about it. What are your hooks? And so that's how I think about it. What are the hooks?
Right.
Yeah, it's good to know, because it is a mask. It comes to you as a mask. And if you see it as an attack on your Christ or trying to take you away from your work, whatever the trouble is will end up disappearing. It will go, because that's all it's trying to do. If you recognize it for what it is, if you really think, oh, I've got this, or my son has this terrible problem, or this whatever has this terrible problem, I've got to spend all my time, day and night, watching him or taking care of the situation. Well, it has you hooked. Yes, it has you hooked. That doesn't mean you don't do what you need to do in a loving manner, but if it's absorbing you, then there's something wrong there. It's a false attachment. God isn't in that. And as Abraham had to put Isaac on the altar, we have to put all things on the altar. God returns them to us without
more perfect than we could ever see them,
and without the personal sense, false attraction that was there before,
and the fear of losing it.
Yes.
Yeah, and one of the things Mrs. Evans taught was that if we have a relationship with someone else, a spouse, a family member, that relationship will never be a good one unless God is in the center of it. And what that means is we need to see everyone as God's child, not ours, not a personal relationship, but a relationship made and kept in God, and it's a divine relationship. And that is what the 91st Psalm is all about. If we dwell in the secret place of the Most High, put everything in our life in that secret place, that's how we get rid of the hooks that the devil will otherwise hook us with.
Yeah.
That should be our objective, to have no hooks, to have no personal weaknesses, to have no personal loves beyond above God.
And you will be released, and this other person will be released. It's a great freeing process. Otherwise, it's a sense of ownership, and we know here, God owns it all. We don't own anything. And when we try to own something, then we try to control it, and then we get frustrated, and we want it to do whatever we want it to do. It becomes a big problem.
You mess it all up.
You mess it all up. You're tending the regulator, as Mrs. Eddy says.
And ultimately, that is a sin.
It is a sin. We're told not to. Now, Florence, you wrote a little bit about the snare, too. Did you want to add anything to this?
No, I mean, it's what you said about it comes tailor-made, but my caution here with it is it can get you to, self-depreciate yourself and keep, oh, I can't do it. Oh, I just can't do it. What is that has got you then always discouraging you and therefore not allowing you to do what you could do. And so you just have to be careful, be patient with yourself. It's a new way of thinking. It requires discipline. Discipline doesn't come overnight. So just be patient and steadily follow what's being taught. That's all.
Thank you.
And Mr. also says that, to abide in the 91st Psalm and know that such abiding is treatment and protection. And another statement on page 222, she says that ever keep the fact of the allness of God and the nothingness of error before us. So these are all just beautiful, reassuring, loving statements that we can work with as well.
Thank you very much. So true. We get so down on ourselves. All we can do is the best we can and just keep on. When every day is a fresh day, new day, so we don't take the past with us. We start afresh. Thank you. And yes, that article, you can find it online by Spurgeon. You think this one statement, he wrote 13 pages about it, so we could talk about it for hours, but I will let you find it and look it up, and I thank you, Susan. Then next, we'll go to the story of Paul and his ship on the ship. I thought it was interesting. I hadn't really thought about it before, but in this instance, here it was weather, but everything seemed so dire. It was just terrible. The aggressive thoughts were just terrible, and it was this one Christ thought of Paul, who knew that there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with him. Therefore, sirs, be of good cheer. He was the Christ voice speaking. It only takes one. And everybody was saved. It all worked out. And then in the trial, it was the same thing. This poor fellow who had only been doing good gets so viciously attacked by aggressive mental suggestion. So one Christ voice that stood up, raised its voice above it all, and turned everything around. So, Jeremy, you want to speak to what you wrote, and Linda?
Yeah, I was really impressed by that. Even, I don't know, it just kind of put it into practice for me, why we need to live this science at all times, and, not go one way than the other, because then it reminds me, it's funny because it took me a little bit to remember how Mrs. Eddy said this so that I could find it, but that quote from Miscellaneous Writings, when Aristotle was asked what a person can gain by uttering a falsehood, he replied, not to be credited when he shall tell the truth. And I just thought everyone believed him on that ship. To me, that's an amazing, amazing thing, and especially in the midst of that. Getting people to believe you anyway is amazing. But in the midst of that, for them to have a good cheer and take some meat, that's wonderful. So it shows what putting this into practice is supposed to do.
Thank you. And that's why your integrity is so important. But in that snare of the fowler, when you get slandered and people tell lies about you, again, got to just keep knowing the truth, knowing you're abiding in the secret place of the Most High. Another way it mentions in that snare of the fowler, it would try to trick you. It would get a so-called good Christian person who actually isn't a good Christian person at all to deceive you in some way. Again, the only answer is in truth, in your relationship with God, your spiritual sense. And then, Linda, what did you write about this?
And to me, it was like a sense of church where he was. And what was really meaningful to me was that they were all saved, and they all actually had different positions on the church in different places, and they were all different, but it was that one man, Paul, like you said, they had the Christ voice speaking that protected them. I guess it was the last line. I don't think I wrote it down. Oh yeah. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. But it wasn't easy. There was a lot going on throughout the time. But I felt like that is how I would like to think and pray about our church, that all souls given to us, and to stand like Paul. And he said, have good cheer, but he spoke. I mean, he even rebuked, I believe, I read the whole story on it at one point, because he rebuked them for not having listened to him. He said, but, God spoke to me and we're still going to be safe. And he modeled and he made sure they were fed, so there was practical care going on. And I just love that sense that through all the storms, sometimes things don't look exactly how you'd like to picture them, but that all, the souls that were given to you, if you're obedient and stay with God, they'll all escape safe to land.
Yeah, I thought that was such a beautiful point. So, because we do sometimes worry about our loved ones or whatever, and they'll all be saved as you are knowing this truth so strongly. Everyone will be safe. Just the way our God is. So, anybody else on this story? Well, and then we will go to the trial. I think I'll have
The trial.
Yeah. Well, I'll have go ahead with what Parthens wrote.
So Parthens wrote the Trial Allegory on page 430 of the Christian Science textbook is an account of a sick person who obeys Romans 12:2. Quote, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." End quote. At first, it seems the patient is all alone in court, without counsel. And it's as though he has simply given up even before the battle has begun, allowing the voices of his accusers to steamroll him into deeper and deeper levels of self-condemnation and hopelessness. Not only do these voices speak without objection, but there is absolutely no cross-examination of any of the witnesses to question the merit of their testimony against the accused. It seems the accused has totally apathetically yielded to accepting a lie. Convinced his illness must be the will of God, he becomes a prisoner on death row. But all is not lost. As Christ promised, everyone on earth now has free access to a pro bono advocate, attorney for the defense of helpless humanity, also known as the Holy Ghost, or divine science, the development of eternal life, truth, and love. From Science and Health, page 588. And so, in the second half of the allegory, the prisoner makes a life-changing choice to appeal the sentence of his accusers, to retry his case, relying only upon his advocate. From lower court consciousness, the court of wrong thinking, the prisoner somehow manages, with all his strength, to do a complete mental about-face and turn his upside-down view of himself right side up. Like changing channels on a radio, he chooses to tune out the lower court's voices, and with heightened awareness, tune in to thoughts unknown and far superior to the dismal croaking of the lower court world. Thus, the dead man walking is now able to test and approve what God's will actually is, and so silence his prosecutors, to destroy utterly their case against him. It is this stupendous reversal of wrong thinking to right thinking that saves the prisoner, overturns the decisions of the lower court.
It's a wonderful summary of that. And it is a wonderful thing to turn to when you think of, goodness, all these voices telling you error. That's why you got to shut it out. So, and Linda, what did you write about it?
Oh, I was just writing about ruminating, and for me, I gave a new sense of rumination, because it seems like sometimes when you have chronic issues, it becomes kind of unconscious and you just accept things, and maybe it's just a quick thought like, oh no, but actually it's still ruminating because you're still thinking again and again about it. And the definition is, given by somebody, was tendency to repetitively mull over a thought or problem without coming to a resolution, and it's unproductive behavior. And Webster says to think again and again. And so I realized even though it seems unconscious, you have to be so alert, as we're taught here continually, to stand at the door and not accept it. And so I was going at the idea of chronic a little differently from this.
This was one of the points Mrs. Evans always brought out on this when we would study the trial. That one sentence: the patient feels ill, ruminates, and the trial commences. You think about it. Anytime error comes to you, you start the, oh goodness, this is happening, or oh, I don't feel, oh, maybe this joint doesn't feel, and this, and then you think, and you don't stop it, and it just grows and grows. So rumination, or what happened yesterday, you go over and over and over how someone did you wrong, over and over. You can't sleep at night. It just keeps talking to you. You've got to stop it. You have to stop it. It's not waving a magic wand. You've got to aggressively shut it up. Because if you don't, you are put into the court of error. And as you saw, that court of error is not a nice place to be. And you'll just get punched around until you finally say, I'm done with this. Get out of it. Get into your truth. Get back to the 91st Psalm. As Florence read, and it's so beautiful that we abide in that 91st Psalm. Stay in it. Study it every day. I do. Memorize it. The 91st Psalm.
I liked it until I got mad at it. I couldn't kick it out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jesus said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." It seemed like it just kept coming and coming and coming until I was just furious.
Thank you. It's no time to be nice. As I said, it's aggressive. Now, Mike, you wrote to this too. She's here, right, Mike? Yes. Mike, would you like to say anything about the trial? You're on mute. We can't hear you anyway if you're talking. Okay, well.
That's why Mrs. Eddy says, be so instant in truth that
Yes.
error is always too late. Be mad at it right away, like Craig does.
Yeah, don't let it, because the rumination is going over and over and over. And I know. I've been there. It's oh my gosh.
And you're giving it life when you do that.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a false sense of we don't have any power at all. Here am I, this weak one here, and it's just doing all it wants. To realize that God is with us, and that it's not our power, but we do have power over its foolishness, I should say.
Yeah.
So I think because I used to just feel so weak all the time, saying the words, but weak. And that's just false.
Thank you.
The false sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right, because God gave you dominion.
Yes, and I didn't think about that. All I was how weak I felt. So, yeah.
And humanly, we are weak. It's only when you realize it's the power of God behind it. And the end of the trial, the way the man gets up and speaks, the Christ consciousness, and says his eyes are looking upward and frees the situation. It's so beautiful. It's a beautiful. You've never read the whole thing. Well, you should have, because you should be reading your Science and Health, right? Start to finish. Okay, now we're going to end. This was something this week. This lovely person called me. I believe she's in the Baltimore area. She's followed us. She knew everything about us. She was just delightful. Anyway, she wrote this to me recently, and it includes a very beautiful testimony. So we'll conclude with this.
And this is yesterday.
Yeah.
Enjoyed the Bible study this morning. It was the first time tuning in, and the comments were meaty and inspiring. One commentary from a farmer in New York really stood out and touched my heart, especially as this is harvesting time. A friend had written some comments based on the inspiration from hymn 150, referring to the wide harvest field. This led me to share an experience that I was privileged to hear from a practitioner when I seemed to be skimming the surface. She was a farmer, and they had crops of potatoes. Their area had had heavy rains, and by the time it came to harvest the field, the potatoes were no good. She had been praying about the situation and felt that her prayers may have been in vain. However, turning to our Father, she heard the message, dig deeper. She took this to heart and got to studying more deeply the Bible, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, and other writings of Mrs. Eddy. This continued for a time. Listening to God, she continued to hear the message, dig deeper. She went to the books again and heard the same message. This time she went to the field and got whatever tool was needed to start digging in the field. She was so grateful for what she discovered. There was a whole, complete new crop underneath where there seemed to be a lost one. The digging was both mental and physical. This testimony is a cherished one and positive proof of science. There is indeed a wide harvest field and a deep one. Why this sharing? Just led to do it.
Dig deeper. So, thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.